No child of mine would become an artist.
Those were the words that shattered Simone Ellison's world. Words so cold, so final, they might as well have been a death sentence. But here's the thing about dreams. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. Simone had it all. At least, that's what everyone thought. The Buckhead mansion, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, the luxury cars in the driveway, the kind of life that made people whisper with envy at Atlanta's most exclusive social events. She was the only daughter of Victor Ellison, one of the most powerful attorneys in Georgia, a man whose name alone could make opposing counsel tremble. Her mother, Marion, was the picture of elegance, always perfectly dressed, always perfectly silent. But behind the gilded doors of that mansion, Simone was suffocating. Every morning she'd wake up in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by law school accolades and framed certificates that felt like prison bars. She'd put on her tailored suit, the one that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and she'd drive to the office where her name was already engraved on a door, Simone Ellison Esquire. Junior partner. The title that was supposed to make her proud only made her feel like an imposter. Because while her hands shuffled through contracts and legal briefs, her mind was somewhere else entirely. In the margins of those important documents, when no one was looking, she'd sketch. Quick, furtive strokes of her pen, a woman's face, a cityscape, abstract patterns that represented the freedom she craved. Art wasn't just a hobby for Simone. It was oxygen. It was the only thing that made her feel alive in a life that was slowly killing her spirit. She'd loved art since she was 6 years old, when her father, back when he still had time for wonder, would take her to museums. Little Simone would stand in front of massive canvases, completely mesmerized, while Victor would explain the technique, the history, the passion behind each brushstroke. Those were the days when she believed her father understood her soul. But that was before law school. Before the expectations became chains. Before practical became more important than passionate. Victor had been clear from the beginning, being an artist won't put food on the table, sweetheart. You need stability. You need respect. You need a real career. And Simone, dutiful daughter that she was, had listened. She'd buried her dreams beneath bar exams, study guides, and case law. She'd convinced herself that her father knew best, that following his path was the same as following her own. Until the day she passed the bar. Everyone celebrated. Champagne flowed. Colleagues congratulated her. Victor beamed with pride, already making plans to bring her into the firm full-time. But Simone felt nothing. No joy. No accomplishment. Just a hollow, gnawing dread that this was her life now. 40, 50, maybe 60 more years of pretending to care about litigation strategies and billable hours. That week, she did something she hadn't done in years. She went to the High Museum of Art. Alone. She stood in front of a painting, a woman at a crossroads, bathed in conflicting light, and something inside her cracked wide open. She watched other visitors, saw the way art moved them, transformed them, gave them something words couldn't express. And she realized with crushing clarity she was living someone else's dream while her own was dying, brushstroke by brushstroke. She had to tell them. She had to make them understand. So one evening, with her heart hammering against her ribs, Simone walked into her father's study. The room smelled of leather and old books and expensive whiskey. Victor sat behind his massive mahogany desk. Marion perched delicately on the nearby sofa, her hands folded in her lap like always. "Dad, Mom, I need to talk to you about something important." Victor looked up from his papers, already impatient. He was a man who measured time in billable increments. Simone's voice trembled, but she pushed forward. "I don't want to be a lawyer. I can't be a lawyer. I want to be an artist. I need to be an artist." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Victor's face transformed. Disbelief turned to anger. Anger turned to something harder, colder. "Absolutely not." His voice was ice. "I did not invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in your education for you to throw it away on paint. Dad, please, just listen." "No." He stood, his imposing frame seeming to fill the entire room. "You have a prestigious degree. You passed the bar. You have a future most people would kill for, and you want to waste it. For art." Marian's hand fluttered to her throat, but she said nothing. She never did. "I'm not asking for permission," Simone heard herself say, surprised by her own courage. "I'm telling you who I am. Practicing law is making me miserable. This isn't my dream, Dad, it's yours." Victor's jaw clenched. When he spoke again, his words were measured, deliberate, lethal. "Then you have a choice to make, Simone. Either you continue as a lawyer and remain a part of this family, or you walk out that door tonight as an artist, and you're no daughter of mine." Marian gasped. "Victor, please." His hand went up, silencing her. Simone's world tilted. She looked at her mother, desperately searching for an ally, but found only fearful eyes and wringing hands. She looked at her father, the man who'd once shown her the magic in museums, and saw only a stranger. The choice was impossible. It was her family or her soul. But was it really a choice at all? Could you sacrifice your dreams to keep your family? Or would you risk losing everything for a chance to be truly free? Simone's hands trembled as she packed her suitcase, not because she was afraid of what lay ahead, though God knows she should have been, but because each item she folded and placed inside felt like she was burying a piece of her old life. The cashmere sweaters her mother had bought her, the jewelry from her college graduation, the framed photo of the three of them at her law school commencement, all smiles, all lies. She left most of it behind. What she took instead told the real story of who she was, her sketchbooks, going back to when she was 12, her favorite brushes, the ones with bristles worn soft from years of secret use, tubes of paint in colors that had names like Cerulean Dreams and Crimson Revolution, a small canvas she'd been working on, hidden in her closet, a self-portrait she'd never had the courage to finish. Behind her, she could hear her mother's muffled sobs from the study, her father's heavy silence, somehow louder than any words. When Simone walked down that grand staircase for the last time, suitcase in hand, art supplies bundled under her arm, Marian appeared in the hallway. Their eyes met. For just a moment, Simone thought her mother might say something, might choose her daughter over her husband's pride. But Marian just pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, and turned away. The front door of the Buckhead mansion closed behind Simone with a sound like a gunshot. She stood on the steps of her childhood home, her former home, and realized she had absolutely no idea what to do next. The warm Atlanta night wrapped around her like a question mark. Where do you go when the only place you've ever known becomes the one place you can't return to? The answer, it turned out, was a $40 a night motel on the outskirts of the city. That first night, Simone lay on a bed that smelled like cheap detergent and other people's regrets, staring at water stains on the ceiling, and thought, what have I done? The confidence that had carried her out of her father's study had evaporated somewhere between the mansion and this motel room with its flickering neon sign and paper-thin walls. Through those walls, she could hear a couple arguing, a baby crying, a television too loud. This was her new reality. No more silk sheets. No more quiet. No more safety net. She'd traded everything for a dream. But what if the dream wasn't enough? By morning, Simone had made a decision. If she was going to do this, really do this, she needed to find a place to live and a way to pay for it. The modest remainder of her college fund would last maybe 3 months if she was careful. After that, she'd have to figure it out. The studio apartment she found in Midtown was about the size of her old walk-in closet. The paint was peeling. The single window overlooked an alley where stray cats fought over garbage. The bathroom had tiles missing and a shower that only produced scalding hot or ice-cold water, never anything in between. The landlord, a man with suspicious eyes and coffee-stained teeth, asked for first and last month's rent in cash. But it was hers. Simone stood in the center of that tiny space and made herself see not what it was, but what it could be. The wall with the best light, that would be where she'd set up her easel. The corner by the window, perfect for her supplies. The rest of the space would have to serve as bedroom, kitchen, and living room all at once, but people had created masterpieces in worse conditions, hadn't they? Van Gogh painted in poverty. Frida Kahlo painted from her sickbed. If they could make art from suffering, Surely she could make art from a studio apartment that smelled faintly of mildew and lost dreams. She set up her easel by the window that very first day, stretched her first canvas, mixed her first colors, and then she stood there, brush in hand, paralyzed by a terrible realization. She was free to paint whatever she wanted, but she had no idea where to start. For years, art had been her escape, her secret rebellion. Now it was supposed to be her entire life. The weight of that transformation felt crushing. What do you paint when painting is no longer an escape but a lifeline? The answer came 3 days later, when her money situation became urgent. Simone needed a job, and she needed one immediately. Her law degree meant nothing here. No firm would hire someone who just passed the bar only to abandon the profession. Besides, if she worked as a lawyer, even part-time, wouldn't that mean her father had been right all along? So she did what millions of struggling artists before her had done. She put on a black shirt and black pants and applied to every restaurant in Midtown. Le Petit Bistro hired her on the spot. The manager, a harried woman named Diane with graying hair and permanent frown, lines, looked Simone up and down and said, "You ever waited tables before?" "No." "You gonna complain about sore feet?" "No." "You gonna steal from the register or show up drunk?" "Absolutely not." Diane shrugged. "Good enough. You start tomorrow. 5 p.m. to close. Don't be late." If Simone thought leaving her family was the hard part, waitressing at Le Petit Bistro taught her she'd been adorably naive. The work was brutal. The customers were worse. This was an upscale establishment where Atlanta's wealthy came to see and be seen, where a single entree cost what Simone now spent on groceries for a week. She'd once been one of those customers, dining without a second thought about the person bringing her food. Now she was invisible to them, just another uniform, another servant. Her feet ached in ways she didn't know feet could ache. Her back screamed. She learned to balance 4 plates at once, to smile when condescended to absorb casual cruelty from people who looked right through her as if she were made of glass. There was the woman who snapped her fingers to get Simone's attention. The man who sent his steak back 3 times and left no tip. The couple who let their children throw food on the floor and expected her to clean it up without comment. Most nights Simone would stumble back to her studio apartment at midnight, her uniform reeking of kitchen grease and other people's expensive meals. She'd collapse on her second-hand mattress, still wearing her shoes because taking them off required energy she didn't have. Some mornings she'd wake up exactly like that, fully dressed, and have to drag herself to the shower to start all over again. But here's what her father never understood. The pain had purpose. Every morning before her shift, Simone would paint, even if it was just for an hour, even if exhaustion made her hands shake, even if what she created wasn't any good. She painted because she'd given up everything for this, and she refused to let that sacrifice be for nothing. She painted her loneliness onto canvas, dark blues and grays that captured the isolation of her tiny apartment. She painted her grief, raw reds and blacks that spoke to the family-shaped hole in her chest. She painted her determination, bright yellows and oranges that defied the darkness threatening to swallow her whole. The paintings weren't pretty. They weren't gallery-ready, but they were hers, and they were honest, and that counted for something, didn't it? 6 weeks into her new life, on a night when she was particularly exhausted, Simone served a young man sitting alone at table 12. She'd noticed him before. He came in at least twice a week, always ordered the same thing, duck confit and black coffee, always read a book while he ate, always left a generous tip. Unlike most of the bistro's clientele, he had kind eyes. Grey eyes, she noticed, the color of storm clouds. "Good evening," Simone said, pulling out her order pad with practiced efficiency. "Can I start you with—" "You look exhausted," he said, and there was such genuine concern in his voice that Simone almost burst into tears right there. She managed a professional smile instead. "Long day. What can I get you?" "The usual, please. But first—" He pushed his untouched water glass toward her. "Drink this. You look like you need it more than I do." It was such a small gesture, such a simple kindness. But in that moment, after weeks of being treated like furniture by people who'd once been her peers, it undid something in Simone. She blinked rapidly, fighting back unexpected emotion. "Thank you," she managed. "That's very kind. I'm Tristan, by the way," he said. "I know we're not supposed to chat up the staff, but you've served me excellent duck about 16 times now. Seems like we should at least know each other's names." Simone hesitated. The old her would have launched into easy small talk, would have recognized the quality of his watch and the cut of his clothes and known exactly how to charm him. But the new her was too tired for pretense. "Simone," she said simply. His smile was warm and genuine. "Beautiful name. French. My mother's favorite movie was Gigi. She loved French culture." The past tense slipped out before she could catch it. Tristan noticed, she could see it in his eyes, but he was gracious enough not to ask. Instead, he just nodded and said, "Well, Simone, I'll have my usual. And take your time. I'm in no rush." That brief exchange became the highlight of Simone's week. It was the first time in 6 weeks that someone in the bistro had seen her as a person rather than a servant. The first time someone had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return. She found herself looking forward to his visits, found herself disappointed on the nights when table 12 remained empty. But she was also realistic enough to know that men like Tristan, men with expensive watches and kind eyes, didn't date their waitresses. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was real life. And in real life, Simone was barely surviving. The emotional toll was harder than the physical exhaustion. Every day was a battle between her choice and her doubt. Simone missed her parents with an intensity that sometimes made it hard to breathe. She'd catch herself reaching for her phone to call her mother, then remember that Marion had chosen Victor's pride over their daughter's happiness. She'd see fathers and daughters together on the street and have to look away before the tears came. She kept a framed photo of her family hidden in a drawer because seeing it on her nightstand was too painful, but throwing it away felt like admitting defeat. Some nights, the loneliness was so profound that Simone would sit on her fire escape, looking at the city lights, and wonder if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd traded a family for a dream. But what if the dream wasn't worth it? What if her father had been right all along? What if being an artist really was just a foolish fantasy, and she'd destroyed her entire life for nothing? What would you do if you couldn't go back and weren't sure how to move forward? 3 months into her new life, something shifted. Simone was walking through Midtown after her shift, too wired to sleep despite being exhausted. She turned a corner and found herself facing a massive street mural, a phoenix rising from flames, wings spread wide, colors so vibrant they seemed to glow in the streetlight. She stood there, frozen, staring at this unexpected beauty in the middle of urban decay. A voice beside her said, "Incredible, isn't it?" Simone turned to find a woman about her age, paint-splattered overalls, locks tied back with a colorful scarf, studying the mural with the same reverence Simone felt. "It's breathtaking," Simone agreed. "Who's the artist?" "Local guy named Marcus. He does murals all over the city. Never signs them, just leaves them like gifts." The woman extended a paint-stained hand. "I'm Keisha." Simone. They talked for an hour on that street corner. Keisha was a sculptor who worked with reclaimed metal, creating pieces that commented on consumerism and waste. She lived in a warehouse she'd converted into a studio, survived on art commissions and teaching kids workshops, and had the kind of fierce passion for her work that made Simone's heart ache with recognition. "You an artist too?" Keisha asked, reading something in Simone's face. "Trying to be," Simone admitted. "I paint, or I'm learning to paint seriously. I'm not sure which. Same thing, really." "You making art?" "Every morning before work." "Then you're an artist. Don't let anyone tell you different." Keisha pulled out her phone. "Give me your number. There's a group of us who meet every Sunday at Piedmont Park. We paint. We critique each other's work. We keep each other sane. You should come." That Sunday, Simone discovered she wasn't alone after all. The group was small, just 6 artists at various stages of their careers, from students to working professionals who created on the side. They set up easels in the park and painted whatever inspired them while passers-by watched and occasionally commented. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. But more importantly, it was community. These were people who understood the calling, the sacrifice, the impossible choice between security and authenticity. They didn't judge her for leaving law. They didn't question whether art was a real career. They just accepted her as one of them. For the first time since walking out of her father's house, Simone felt like she might actually survive this. The artistic community opened up a world Simone had never known existed, despite living in Atlanta her whole life. Keisha introduced her to galleries that hosted open studio nights where emerging artists could show their work. Marcus, the mural artist, taught her about finding inspiration in unexpected places. A photographer named James showed her how to document her own work professionally. Slowly, piece by piece, Simone was building not just a portfolio, but a life. But building a life required money, and money remained desperately tight. After rent and basic necessities, Simone had maybe $20 a week for art supplies. She learned to haunt clearance sales at craft stores, to mix her own colors to make paint last longer, to use every scrap of canvas. She painted on cardboard when she couldn't afford proper materials. She created beauty from poverty, just like she'd promised herself she would. Then came the night that changed everything, or at least began to change everything. The Petit Bistro was hosting a special event for Atlanta's art community, a fundraiser for the High Museum. The restaurant was packed with gallery owners, collectors, artists and critics, all the people Simone was desperately trying to impress, except now she was serving them appetizers instead of networking with them. The irony was not lost on her. She was delivering drinks to a table of gallery owners when she heard a familiar voice. Simone? Simone Ellison? She turned to find Jackson Morris, an old family friend and prominent art collector. He'd been to dinner at the Buckhead Mansion dozens of times when she was growing up. Now he was staring at her uniform with undisguised shock. "Mr. Morris," she said, trying to maintain her composure. "Good to see you." What are you?" He seemed genuinely confused. "Does your father know you're working here?" The table went silent, everyone watching this interaction with the kind of interest people have when they sense drama unfolding. Simone lifted her chin. "My father and I aren't in contact at the moment." "Excuse me, I have other tables." She walked away with as much dignity as she could muster, but her hands shook as she set down a tray of wine glasses. This was her nightmare, being seen, being pitied, being reduced to a cautionary tale whispered about at dinner parties. "Did you hear about Victor Ellison's daughter? Threw away a law career to be an artist. Now she's waiting tables. Such a waste." But then, something unexpected happened. During her break, when Simone was sitting in the alley behind the bistro trying not to cry, Jackson Morris found her. "I didn't mean to embarrass you in there," he said, lowering himself onto the step beside her with a groan. "These old knees." "Listen, Simone, I've known your father for 20 years and I've never agreed with his views on art. He's a brilliant attorney, but a stubborn fool when it comes to understanding creative passion." Simone looked at him, surprised. "Your mother told me what happened," Jackson continued. "She called me a few weeks ago, asked if I'd seen you. She's worried sick, you know. They both are, though Victor would rather eat glass than admit it." "He gave me an ultimatum," Simone said, her voice hard. "Be a lawyer or stop being his daughter." I made my choice. A brave choice. A terrifying choice. Jackson pulled out a business card. "Look, I run a small gallery in Virginia Highland. We showcase emerging artists. If you're serious about this, if you're really committed to making it as an artist, I'd like to see your work. No promises, no special treatment because I knew you when you were 6. But I'll give you a fair look." Simone took the card with trembling hands. "Why would you help me?" "Because I've spent 40 years in this business, and I know real passion when I see it. Anyone willing to give up what you gave up, that's someone who deserves a chance." He stood, knees creaking. "Email me some photos of your work. We'll go from there." After he left, Simone sat in that alley and cried. Not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming possibility that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't destroyed her life after all. Maybe there was a path forward. Maybe the dream was possible. But possibility and reality are different things, and Simone still had to survive day by day. Back at the bistro, as she wiped down tables after the event ended, she noticed one customer remained. Tristan, at table 12, his book closed, watching her with those storm cloud eyes. "Long night?" he asked, when she approached. "You have no idea." "Actually, I might." He hesitated. "I saw what happened with Jackson Morris. I wasn't eavesdropping, but—" Simone felt her face heat with embarrassment. "So, you know I'm a waitress with delusions of being an artist." "No," Tristan said firmly. "I know you're an artist who's doing whatever it takes to survive while pursuing your passion." There's a difference. Something in his tone made Simone really look at him for the first time. Not just the expensive clothes and kind eyes, but the way he held himself, the understanding in his expression. "You sound like you speak from experience." "My family runs an art gallery," he admitted. "Have for 3 generations. Everyone assumes I'll take it over, that I'll dedicate my life to selling other people's art. But what if I want to create my own path? What if the family business feels like a cage, even if it's a gilded one?" They looked at each other across the empty restaurant, 2 people from wealthy families who'd chosen to question the paths laid out for them. 2 people trying to figure out who they were beyond their last names and family expectations. "There's an art exhibition opening Saturday night," Tristan said. "Free admission, open to the public. I was planning to go. Would you want to? I mean, if you're interested in art, you might enjoy." He was nervous. This confident, well-dressed man was actually nervous asking her to an art show. Something warm unfurled in Simone's chest. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. "I'd really like that." That Saturday, Simone stood in front of her tiny closet, trying to find something appropriate to wear. Everything was either her waitress uniform or paint-stained art clothes. Finally, she settled on a simple black dress she'd worn to a law school function years ago. It still fit, barely, though she'd lost weight from the physical labor and tight budget. She studied herself in the cracked mirror of her bathroom and thought about how much had changed. 4 months ago, she'd been Simone Ellison, attorney at law, living in a mansion. Now, she was just Simone, artist and waitress, living in a studio that barely qualified as habitable. But for the first time in months, she felt something like excitement. The gallery was in a renovated warehouse in the arts district, all exposed brick and track lighting. Contemporary paintings covered the walls, bold abstracts, photorealistic portraits, mixed media pieces that challenged the viewer. Simone felt like she'd come home to a place she'd never been. Simone. She turned to find Tristan walking toward her, and for a moment, seeing him outside the context of the restaurant, she was struck by how attractive he was. Not just handsome, but interesting. The kind of face that suggested depth and intelligence and kindness all at once. "You made it," he said, his smile genuine and warm. "I was worried you might." "Stand you up? Never. I've been looking forward to this all week." They moved through the gallery together, falling into easy conversation about the artwork. Tristan knew an astonishing amount about technique, history, and artistic movements. He could identify a painter's influences, explain the cultural context of a piece, and appreciate both technical skill and emotional impact. Talking to him felt like talking to someone who truly understood the language of art, who spoke it as fluently as she did. "That one," Simone said, stopping in front of a massive canvas covered in swirling purples and blues. "It's heartbreak. You can feel it, can't you? The way the colors bleed into each other, like wounds that won't close." Tristan studied the painting, then studied her. "You see the emotion first, then the technique. Most people do it the other way around. Is that wrong?" "No. It's honest." He gestured to a sculpture across the room. "Come on, I want to show you something." They spent 2 hours in that gallery, and Simone couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so intellectually stimulated, so understood. They debated the merits of abstract versus representational art. They discussed whether art should be beautiful or truthful, or both. They stood in front of a painting that was just a white canvas with a single red brushstroke and argued about whether it was profound or pretentious. Simone defended it, Tristan played devil's advocate, and both of them laughed at the absurdity and importance of it all. When the gallery closed, they stood on the sidewalk outside, neither wanting the evening to end. "Can I ask you something?" Tristan said. "That night at the bistro, when Jackson Morris recognized you, why did you give up law? What made you willing to risk everything?" Simone considered the question, really thought about it. "Because I woke up every day living someone else's dream and dying a little inside. Because I looked at my future and saw 40 years of doing work that meant nothing to me, and I couldn't breathe. Because being true to yourself has to count for something, even if it costs you everything. Even family. Even family." Tristan nodded slowly. "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard. Or the stupidest. Sometimes they're the same thing." He walked her to her car, a beaten-up Honda Civic she'd bought for $800, a far cry from the luxury vehicle she'd left behind, and before she got in he said, "I'd like to see you again. Not at the bistro, not as customer and server, but as this. As friends who love art and understand what it means to question the path you're supposed to take." "I'd like that too," Simone said, and meant it with her whole heart. Driving home that night, Simone felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe she hadn't destroyed her life. Maybe she'd saved it. But hope and reality still had a long way to meet in the middle, and the next weeks tested Simone in ways she hadn't anticipated. She photographed her best paintings and sent them to Jackson Morris, then waited in agony for a response. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2 weeks. With each day of silence, Simone's confidence eroded a little more. Maybe her work wasn't good enough. Maybe Jackson had only offered to look out of pity. Maybe she really was delusional to think she could make it as an artist. Meanwhile, her relationship with Tristan was blossoming into something neither of them had expected. They met at coffee shops before her shifts, walked through Piedmont Park on Sunday mornings, spent hours in used bookstores debating the merits of various artists and movements. Tristan was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly honest about his own struggles with family expectations. But there was something Simone hadn't told him yet, the full extent of what she'd sacrificed. He knew she wasn't on good terms with her parents, but he didn't know about the ultimatum, the disownment, the complete severing of ties. She was afraid that if he knew the whole truth, he'd see her differently. He'd see her as broken, as the girl whose own father had rejected her. How do you tell someone you're falling for that your own family decided you weren't worth loving? The answer came one rainy Tuesday when Tristan picked her up after a particularly brutal shift at the bistro. Simone got in the car and just started crying, exhausted, overwhelmed, terrified that she'd made a mistake she couldn't undo. Hey, Tristan said gently, pulling over into a parking lot. "What happened? Did someone hurt you?" "No, I just—" Simone couldn't get the words out. "I'm so tired, Tristan. I'm so tired of pretending I'm okay when I'm barely holding it together. I miss my parents. I miss my old life. I miss feeling like I belonged somewhere." "Tell me," he said. "Tell me everything." So she did. She told him about Victor's ultimatum, about walking out with nothing but her art supplies, about the loneliness that sometimes felt like it would swallow her whole. She told him about lying awake at night, wondering if her father ever thought about her, if her mother ever regretted staying silent, if they missed her even a fraction as much as she missed them. She told him about the guilt, the overwhelming, crushing guilt of choosing herself over her family, even though she knew it was the right choice. When she finished, Tristan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My parents want to meet you." Simone blinked. "What?" "I've told them about you. Not the details, just that I'd met someone remarkable, someone brave, someone who understands. What it's like to question everything you've been told about who you're supposed to be." He took her hand. "They want to invite you to dinner, at our house, Sunday night." Fear flooded through Simone. "Tristan, I can't. Your parents are art collectors. They're part of that world, and I'm just what? Just someone working 3 times as hard as anyone I know to pursue their passion. Just someone brave enough to stand up to her father and choose her own path. Just someone I'm falling for." He squeezed her hand. "Simone, my parents aren't going to judge you. If anything, they'll admire you. What if they think I'm not good enough for you? Then they're wrong, and I'll tell them that—" The certainty in his voice undid something in Simone. Here was someone who saw her, really saw her, and didn't find her lacking. Someone who knew about her failures and fears and chose to stand beside her anyway. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll come." That Sunday, Simone stood in front of a mansion that rivaled her parents' home, clutching a bottle of wine she couldn't really afford and trying not to run away. Tristan had said his family was in the art business, but this was more than successful. This was generational wealth, old money, the kind of establishment she'd grown up around and then been exiled from. What was she doing here? The door opened before she could knock, and Tristan stood there, smiling. "You look terrified." "I am terrified. Don't be." "Come on." Inside, the Carmichael house was both familiar and foreign. Like her parents' home, it was filled with expensive furniture and carefully curated art. Unlike her parents' home, it felt warm, lived in. There were stacks of art books on tables, sketches tacked to walls, a general sense that this was a home where creativity was encouraged rather than confined to designated museum visits. Maxwell and Vivian Carmichael were in their late 50s, both elegant and welcoming. Maxwell had the same kind eyes as his son, while Vivian's sharp intelligence was evident in every question she asked. They shook Simone's hand warmly, ushered her into a dining room where the table was set beautifully, and immediately put her at ease. But it was Tristan's younger sister, Ellie, who really won Simone over. 23, and fresh out of art school, Ellie burst into the room with paint-stained fingers and uncontained enthusiasm. "You're Simone. Tristan won't shut up about you. Are you really an artist? What medium do you work in? Can I see photos of your work?" "Ellie," Vivian said mildly, "let the poor woman sit down first." Over dinner, Simone found herself relaxing despite her nervousness. The Carmichaels asked about her art, but not in a judgmental way. They asked because they genuinely cared. When she admitted she'd left a law career to pursue painting, Maxwell nodded thoughtfully and said, "That takes tremendous courage. Most people spend their whole lives doing what they think they should do instead of what they need to do." "My father didn't see it that way," Simone admitted. "Then your father was wrong," Vivian said gently but firmly. "I'm sorry he couldn't support your choice, but his inability to see your worth doesn't diminish your worth." Something cracked in Simone's chest. She'd been carrying her father's rejection like a stone, proof that she'd made a terrible mistake. But here were successful, intelligent people telling her that the failure was his, not hers. After dinner, Maxwell took her to his study, a room lined floor to ceiling with art, from old masters to contemporary works. "This is our collection," he said. "3 generations of Carmichaels have built this. Some pieces are worth millions. Some are worth nothing except sentimental value. Can you guess which ones I treasure most?" Simone studied the walls. Her eye caught on a small watercolor tucked between 2 large oils, a simple painting of a child's handprint, clearly done by someone very young. "That one?" Maxwell smiled. "Ellie painted that when she was 4. It's worth nothing to anyone but me, and I wouldn't sell it for anything in the world." He gestured to another piece. "This one Tristan made in high school. Terrible technique, but you can see him searching for something, trying to express something he couldn't put into words. That's what art is, isn't it? The attempt to express the inexpressible." "Yes," Simone whispered, fighting tears. "Yes, exactly." "I'd like to see your work sometime," Maxwell said. "Not because Tristan is interested in you, though that doesn't hurt, but because any artist brave enough to sacrifice what you've sacrificed deserves to be seen." That night changed something fundamental in Simone. The Carmichaels didn't just accept her, they welcomed her, treated her like she mattered, like her art mattered. Vivian gave her contact information for several gallery owners she knew. Ellie insisted they exchange numbers and meet for coffee to talk about art and life. Maxwell told her about an upcoming show at their gallery that might interest her. For the first time since leaving home, Simone felt like she had a family again. Not a replacement for the one she'd lost, but a new constellation of people who cared about her. But the universe has a way of testing us right when we start to feel secure, and Simone's test came in the form of an email from Jackson Morris. "Dear Simone," it read, "thank you for sharing your work with me. I see raw talent and genuine emotion in your paintings, but I also see someone still finding their voice. I'd like to offer you a spot in our Emerging Artists show next month. Not a solo exhibition, but a chance to display 3 pieces alongside 5 other artists. It's not much, but it's a start. Let me know if you're interested. Simone read that email 7 times, her hands shaking. A chance. An actual, real chance to show her work in a legitimate gallery. This was everything she'd been working toward, everything she'd sacrificed for. She called Tristan immediately. I got into a show, an actual art show at Jackson's gallery. His shout of joy was so loud she had to pull the phone away from her ear. Simone, that's incredible. When is it? What are you going to show? Oh my God, I'm so proud of you. They celebrated that night at a diner where the coffee was terrible and the pie was divine, and Simone felt like she was floating. Maybe this was really happening. Maybe she really could make it. But here's the thing about dreams. The closer you get to achieving them, the more terrifying they become. What if she showed her work and everyone hated it? What if the critics tore her apart? What if this proved her father right, that she didn't have what it took to make it as an artist? The weeks leading up to the show were consumed with preparation. Simone painted like her life depended on it, because in many ways, it did. She created 3 pieces that she felt represented her journey. One painting of a closed door, symbolic of what she'd left behind. One of a small lit window in darkness, representing her tiny apartment and the hope she'd found there, and one abstract piece she called Becoming, all swirling colors and undefined shapes, representing transformation and uncertainty. Keisha and the other artists from the park helped her prepare, offering critiques and encouragement. Ellie came over and helped her photograph her work professionally. Maxwell loaned her proper frames. Tristan was her constant support, bringing her food when she forgot to eat, sitting quietly while she worked, reminding her to breathe when the anxiety became overwhelming. The night before the show, Simone couldn't sleep. She lay in her tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how far she'd come and how far she still had to go. 6 months ago, she'd walked out of her father's house with nothing. Now she had art hanging in a real gallery. But the fear was overwhelming. Not just fear of failure, but fear of what success might mean. If the show went well, if people actually liked her work, if she started to make it as an artist, would that mean she'd never reconcile with her parents? Would success prove that she'd been right to leave, cementing the division between them forever? Part of her still hoped that somehow, someday, Victor would see her art and understand why she'd chosen this path. But how could that happen if he refused to even speak to her? The opening night arrived with the weight of destiny. Simone stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, wearing the same black dress from her first date with Tristan, her hands trembling as she tried to apply makeup. She looked different than she had 6 months ago. Thinner, yes, from the physical labor and tight budget. But there was something else, a hardness around her eyes that came from surviving, a determination in her jawline that hadn't been there when she lived in comfort. She looked like someone who'd been through a war and come out the other side changed. You ready? Tristan called from outside her door. Was she ready? Could anyone be ready for a moment that might define the rest of their life? Ready? She lied, opening the door. The gallery was already filling with people when they arrived. Collectors, critics, other artists, curious onlookers drawn by free wine and the promise of discovering new talent. Simone's stomach churned as she saw her 3 paintings hanging on the wall, her name printed on small placards beside them. There they were, her soul made visible, exposed for anyone to judge. Jackson Morris found her immediately, gave her a warm hug, and whispered, "Breathe. Your work is strong. Trust it." But trusting her work became exponentially harder when she saw the other artists in the show. They were all talented, all confident, all seeming to belong in this world in a way Simone still didn't. She found herself standing in a corner, watching people examine her paintings, trying to read their expressions, dying a little every time someone moved past her work without stopping. Then something remarkable happened. A woman in an elegant red dress stopped in front of Becoming, Simone's abstract piece, and stood there for a full 5 minutes. She didn't just glance and move on, she studied it, leaned in close, stepped back to see it from a distance. When she finally turned away, she had tears in her eyes. Simone's heart pounded. Was that good? Bad? Did the woman hate it so much it made her cry? "That's Anne Hartwell," Tristan whispered beside her. "She's one of the most respected critics in the city, if she's moved by your work." But before he could finish, another person stopped in front of Simone's paintings. Then another. Soon there was a small crowd, people discussing her use of color, her emotional honesty, the way her work told a story without words. Simone stood frozen, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. Jackson appeared beside her, grinning. "See? I told you. Your work speaks to people." The evening became a blur of introductions and compliments and questions about her technique and inspiration. People wanted to know her story, wanted to understand the artist behind the work. Simone found herself telling the truth, or parts of it anyway. She talked about choosing passion over security, about finding beauty in struggle, about painting through pain. She didn't mention her father's ultimatum or the fact that she was waiting tables to survive, but she was honest about the cost of following your dreams. "Your becoming piece," a man said, introducing himself as a curator from a small gallery in Decatur. "It resonates. There's a rawness to it that's rare in emerging artists. You're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to be truthful." "Thank you," Simone managed, her voice thick with emotion. "That means everything." As the night wore on, Simone found herself standing with the Carmichaels, who'd come out in force to support her. Maxwell, Vivian, Ellie, and Tristan formed a protective circle around her, celebrating her small triumph, making her feel valued and seen. "You should be incredibly proud," Vivian said, squeezing Simone's hand. "This is just the beginning." But even in the midst of celebration, Simone felt the absence of her own parents like a physical ache. This should have been a moment she shared with her father, showing him that she could make it, that art wasn't just a foolish dream. She found herself scanning the crowd, some irrational part of her hoping to see Victor and Marion walk through the door. They didn't come. Of course they didn't come. Near the end of the evening, as the crowd was thinning, something happened that shifted everything. Anne Hartwell, the critic who'd been moved by Simone's work, approached with Jackson Morris. "Miss Ellison," she said, her voice kind but professional, "I write for the Atlanta Arts Review. I'd like to feature you in our Emerging Artists section next month. Would you be willing to do an interview?" Simone's knees nearly buckled. The Atlanta Arts Review was read by everyone who mattered in the city's art scene. A feature would mean visibility, credibility, the possibility of more opportunities. Yes, absolutely, thank you." Anne smiled. "Your work moved me tonight. There's a vulnerability to it that's becoming rare in contemporary art. Everyone's so worried about being sophisticated that they forget to be honest. You haven't forgotten." After Anne left, Simone turned to find Tristan watching her with such pride and affection that her heart skipped. "You did it," he said softly. "You really did it." "I showed 3 paintings at a group exhibition," she said, trying to stay grounded. "That's hardly making it." "No, but it's proof that you can. It's proof that your father was wrong." He pulled her close, right there in the gallery, and whispered against her hair, "I'm so proud of you. So incredibly proud." In that moment, wrapped in Tristan's arms, surrounded by her adopted family, standing in front of her own artwork hanging in a real gallery, Simone felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. But the universe wasn't done testing her yet. The next few weeks brought a whirlwind of changes. The feature in Atlanta Arts Review came out, accompanied by a photo of Simone in her studio apartment, paintbrush in hand, looking fierce and determined. The article told her story, the choice she'd made, the sacrifices she'd endured, the art that had emerged from her struggle. It was honest and raw and beautiful, and it made Simone cry when she first read it. The response was immediate. Her social media following grew. Other galleries reached out. She sold 2 of the 3 paintings from the show, not for much, but enough to cover a couple months' rent. The tiny Decatur gallery offered her a solo show in 6 months. Suddenly, impossibly, Simone's art career was becoming real. But success brought its own complications. The article had mentioned her legal background, and people in Atlanta's interconnected social circles put the pieces together. She was Victor Ellison's daughter, the one who'd walked away from the family firm. The whispers started, some admiring, some pitying, some judgmental. Did her parents know she was making it? Had they seen the article? Would they reach out? They didn't. The silence from her family was deafening, made worse by the fact that Simone's life was improving without them. She wanted to share her successes with her mother, wanted to prove to her father that she'd made the right choice. But the door Victor had closed remained firmly shut, and the pain of that rejection cut deeper now than it had when she'd had nothing to show for her sacrifice. How do you celebrate your dreams coming true when the people you most want to share it with have chosen not to be there? Tristan noticed her struggling. One evening, after she'd spent an hour staring at her phone, debating whether to text her mother, he took her hand and said, "Talk to me. What's going on in your head?" Simone exhaled shakily. "I thought if I succeeded, if I proved I could make it as an artist, my parents would see that I was right, that they'd be proud of me. But they don't even know, and if they do know, they don't care enough to reach out." "Maybe they're ashamed," Tristan suggested gently. "Maybe they realize they were wrong but don't know how to admit it. Or maybe they really meant it when they disowned me. Maybe to them, I really am no longer their daughter." The thought was crushing. Simone had given up everything for her dream, and she was making that dream happen, but the cost remained astronomical. She'd traded her family for her art, and some days she wasn't sure the equation balanced. But then she'd get to her studio apartment, stand in front of her easel and paint, and the act of creation itself would remind her why she'd made this choice. Art wasn't just about success or recognition or proving her father wrong. It was about expressing something essential, something true. It was about being authentic in a world that constantly pressured her to be someone else. And slowly, painfully, Simone began to accept that she might have to be okay with her parents never understanding that. The relationship with Tristan deepened through these difficult weeks. He became her anchor, her safe harbor in the storm of uncertainty and change. They spent almost every free moment together, exploring the city, visiting galleries, talking about everything from art philosophy to childhood memories to hopes for the future. One Sunday afternoon, they were walking through Piedmont Park when Tristan said, "I need to tell you something." Simone's stomach dropped. Those words never preceded good news. "I've been thinking about what you said," Tristan continued, "about choosing yourself over security, and I've realized I've been doing the opposite my whole life. I've been letting my parents' expectations define my path, just like you did before you left. Tristan, your family supports you. They're not like my father. No, but they still have expectations. They assume I'll take over the gallery, that I'll dedicate my life to the family business, and maybe I will, eventually. But I want it to be my choice, not just the default because I'm too afraid to question it." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "You've inspired me to be braver, Simone, to ask myself what I really want, instead of just accepting what I'm supposed to want." "And what do you want?" Tristan smiled, but there was vulnerability in his eyes. "Honestly, right now, I want you. I want to be with someone who challenges me, who understands what it's like to question everything, who's brave enough to rebuild their entire life from scratch. I want what we have." Simone's breath caught. "I want that too. But Tristan, I'm still figuring out my life. I'm barely keeping my head above water most days. I can't promise you stability or—" "I don't want stability. I want authenticity. I want someone real." He cupped her face gently. "I'm falling in love with you, Simone. Actually, that's a lie. I've already fallen. Completely." The world seemed to stop. In that moment, in the middle of Piedmont Park on a sunny Sunday afternoon, Simone realized that this was what she'd been searching for all along. Not just artistic success, but genuine connection. Someone who saw all of her, the broken parts and the brave parts, the fear and the determination, and loved her anyway. "I love you too," she whispered. And then they were kissing, and Simone felt like she'd found home in a person instead of a place. But love, as beautiful as it was, couldn't erase the wounds left by her family's rejection. And those wounds were about to be torn open in a way Simone never anticipated. It started with a phone call from her mother. Simone was at the bistro in the middle of a dinner rush when her phone buzzed. She almost didn't answer. She was slammed with tables, and Diane was already giving her warning looks about being on her phone. But when she saw Mom on the screen, her heart stopped. She ducked into the supply closet, hands shaking as she answered. "Mom?" "Simone." Marion's voice was thick with tears. "Oh, sweetheart, I saw the article. I saw your paintings. They're beautiful. You're so talented, and I'm so sorry." "I'm so sorry." 6 months of pain and longing crashed over Simone like a wave. "Mom, Your father saw the article too." Marion's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's been impossible since. Won't talk about it, but I can tell it's affecting him. Simone, he's proud of you. He won't say it, but I know he is. Then why hasn't he called? Why hasn't he?" Pride. Stubbornness. Fear that if he admits he was wrong, it means he destroyed his relationship with his daughter for nothing. Marion sobbed quietly. "I should have stood up for you that night. I should have told him he was being cruel and unreasonable. I should have chosen you. I'm so sorry I didn't." Simone was crying now too, pressed against shelves of napkins and industrial-sized cans of tomato sauce, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. "I miss you, Mom. I miss you so much. I miss you too, baby. Every single day." They talked for 10 more minutes, both crying, both apologizing, both mourning the time they'd lost. Marion told her about the garden she'd been working on, a creative outlet she'd taken up in the absence of her daughter. Simone told her about Tristan, about the Carmichaels, about the slow building of a new life. It wasn't reconciliation. Victor's pride still stood between them like a wall, but it was connection, and that counted for something. When Simone finally hung up and returned to the dining room, Diane took one look at her tear-stained face and sent her home early. "You're useless to me like this anyway," she said, but her tone was almost kind. "Go. Whatever's going on, deal with it." Simone drove to Tristan's apartment in a daze and collapsed into his arms the moment he opened the door. She told him everything: the call, her mother's apology, the confirmation that her father had seen her work, but was too proud to reach out. "He's seen what you've accomplished," Tristan said, holding her tight. "He knows you were right. That's something, isn't it?" "Is it? What good is being right if he still won't talk to me?" Tristan didn't have an answer for that, and they sat together in the dark of his living room, Simone curled against his chest, both of them silent because sometimes there are no words for certain kinds of pain. But the phone call from Marion had cracked something open, both in Simone and, apparently, in the universe, because 3 days later, Jackson Morris called with news that would change everything. "I've secured you a spot in a charity gala next month," he said, his voice crackling with excitement. "It's a major event. All of Atlanta's elite will be there. We're auctioning art to raise money for arts education in underprivileged schools. They want one piece from you. Your choice which one, but it needs to be significant. This is high visibility, Simone. This could launch your career." Simone's mind reeled. A charity gala. Atlanta's elite. The kind of event her father would absolutely attend. He'd been a patron of arts education for years, back when Simone was growing up, and he still believed art had value, even if he didn't believe his daughter should pursue it. What would happen if Victor saw her work in person? Not reproduced in a magazine but hanging in a gallery, her name on a placard, proof that she'd not only survived but thrived. "I'll do it," Simone heard herself say, "and I know exactly which piece I want to submit." Over the next 3 weeks, Simone created what would become her most personal, most vulnerable, most important work yet. She called it Crossroads, and it depicted a young black woman standing in a doorway, 1 foot in shadow, 1 foot in light. Behind her, barely visible in the darkness, was the suggestion of a grand house, her past, her family, everything she'd left behind. Before her, in the light, was nothing but possibility, terrifying, beautiful, undefined possibility. The woman's hand hovered between the 2 spaces, trembling, uncertain. Her face was turned away, unknowable. Was she stepping forward into the light or back into the shadow? The painting didn't answer that question. It just held the moment of choice, frozen forever in paint and canvas. Creating it nearly destroyed Simone. Every brushstroke felt like reopening a wound. She painted late into the night, unable to stop even when exhaustion made her hands shake. She painted through tears, through doubt, through the overwhelming weight of everything this piece represented. Tristan found her one night at 3 a.m., still painting, her face streaked with paint and tears. "Simone, you need to sleep." "I can't. It's not finished. It's not right yet. It's beautiful. It's the most powerful thing you've ever created. It's my whole life on a canvas." Simone's voice broke. "What if it's not enough? What if people see it and think I'm being melodramatic? What if my father sees it and still doesn't care?" Tristan pulled her away from the easel, held her while she sobbed out 6 months of accumulated pain and fear and longing. "Even if your father never understands," he said quietly, "even if he never comes around, you'll have this. You'll have proof that you turned your pain into something beautiful." "That's not nothing, Simone. That's everything." But the question remained, would creating beauty from pain ever be enough to heal the wounds that pain had left behind? The night of the charity gala arrived like destiny wearing a formal dress. Simone stood in front of the mirror in her tiny studio apartment, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. 7 months ago, she'd been a lawyer living in a mansion. Tonight, she was an artist whose painting would be auctioned alongside works by established names at an event where tickets cost more than her monthly rent. The black dress she wore was borrowed from Ellie. The shoes were from a thrift store. But the confidence, hard-won, battle-scarred, real, that was all hers. "You ready?" Tristan called from outside her door, and Simone took one last look at herself. The woman in the mirror looked nervous, but determined. Scared, but unbroken. Everything she'd been through showed in her eyes, and for the first time, she wasn't ashamed of that. "Ready," she said, opening the door to find not just Tristan, but the entire Carmichael family waiting in the hallway. Maxwell in his elegant tux, Vivian stunning in emerald green, Ellie practically bouncing with excitement. They'd come to pick her up together, to stand with her, to be her family on a night when the absence of her own parents felt like a physical weight. "You look beautiful," Vivian said, pulling her into a warm embrace. "And your painting is going to be the star of the show." "I just know it. No pressure, though," Ellie added with a grin, linking her arm through Simone's. "Just your entire future career riding on one night, totally casual." Despite her nerves, Simone laughed. This family had given her something she'd lost, the feeling of being loved unconditionally, supported without reservation. They believed in her when her own father couldn't. They'd chosen her when her own mother had remained silent. And tonight, they were standing beside her, ready to celebrate or commiserate, whatever the evening brought. But as they drove toward the venue, Simone couldn't stop thinking about one terrible question. What if her father was there? The gala was being held at the Carter Center, a venue her family had attended dozens of times for similar charity events. Victor Ellison was a major donor to arts education programs. The odds that he'd be at this particular event were astronomically high, which meant that tonight, after 7 months of silence, Simone might come face to face with the man who'd disowned her. Was she ready for that? Could anyone be ready for that? The Carter Center was transformed into an art lover's paradise. Paintings lined the walls of the main hall, each one spotlit, each one representing an artist's soul made visible. Simone's crossroads hung in a place of honor, not the most prominent position, but not hidden either. When she saw it there, professionally lit, her name on a placard beneath it, something in her chest expanded painfully. This was real. This was happening. She was actually here, an artist among artists, not an imposter or a disappointment or a failure. She was exactly who she'd fought to become. But even as guests began arriving in their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, even as people stopped to admire her painting, even as a few collectors asked her questions about her technique and inspiration, Simone couldn't stop scanning the crowd, looking for a familiar face, dreading and desperately hoping to see her parents walk through those doors. Then, across the room, she saw him. Victor Ellison stood in front of her painting, completely still, staring at crossroads as if it held the secrets of the universe. He looked older than Simone remembered, greyer at the temples, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He was alone, without Marion, and as Simone watched, barely breathing, she saw something impossible happen. Her father's hand came up to his mouth, and his shoulders began to shake. Was he crying? Victor Ellison, the man who never showed weakness, who believed emotion was something to be controlled and contained, was standing in front of his daughter's painting with tears streaming down his face. Simone's own eyes filled. She took a step toward him, then stopped. What would she even say? What words existed for this moment? Seeing the father who'd rejected her, who'd told her to choose between family and dreams, standing in front of the choice she'd made, finally understanding what it had cost her. Tristan's hand found hers, squeezed gently. Do you want to go to him? Before Simone could answer, before she could even process the question, she saw another familiar figure enter the hall. Marion Ellison, elegant in a navy dress, her eyes searching the crowd until they landed on her husband. And then, following Marion's gaze, they landed on Simone. For a moment, mother and daughter just stared at each other across the crowded room. 7 months of silence. 7 months of pain. 7 months of wondering if they'd ever stand in the same space again. And now here they were, separated by 50 feet and a chasm of hurt that seemed impossible to cross. Then Marion smiled. A tentative, tearful, hopeful smile that said everything words couldn't. And before Simone even realized she was moving, she was walking toward her mother, then running, and Marion was running too. And they met in the middle of that elegant hall full of Atlanta's elite and crashed into each other like survivors of a shipwreck finally reaching shore. Oh, my baby, Marion sobbed, holding Simone so tight it hurt. My baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Mom, Simone choked out, unable to say anything else, just clinging to her mother and crying like the world was ending and beginning all at once. People were staring. Simone was vaguely aware of the crowd around them, of whispers and curious looks, but none of it mattered. Nothing mattered except her mother's arms around her, her mother's tears mixing with her own, her mother's voice saying, I love you, I love you, I never stop loving you over and over like a prayer. When they finally pulled apart, both their faces streaked with mascara and tears, Simone became aware of another presence. Victor stood a few feet away, watching them with an expression Simone had never seen on her father's face before. He looked broken, humbled, uncertain. All the confidence and authority that had defined him was gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable and almost frightened. Simone, he said, and his voice cracked on her name. Simone's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. This was the man who'd given her an ultimatum. The man who'd told her she was no daughter of his if she chose art. The man whose rejection had haunted every brushstroke, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt over the past 7 months. And now he stood before her, this powerful attorney who could command courtrooms, looking like he didn't know what to do with his hands. Dad, she managed, her voice small. Victor's face crumpled. I saw your painting, he said, and tears were flowing freely now. This man who never cried, who believed emotions were weakness. I stood in front of it and I saw everything. The house we made you leave. The choice we forced you to make. The courage it took to walk through that door into the unknown. And I realized, his voice broke completely, I realized what an absolute fool I've been. Simone couldn't speak, could barely process what she was hearing. I thought I was protecting you, Victor continued, the words tumbling out like he'd been holding them back for months. I thought I was steering you toward security, toward a good life. But I was really just protecting myself. My pride, my vision of who you should be, instead of seeing who you were. And when you chose yourself over my expectations, I punished you for it because I couldn't admit I was wrong. He stepped closer, and Simone could see that his hands were shaking. But I was wrong, Simone. I was so terribly, cruelly wrong. You are an extraordinary artist. Your work it's breathtaking. It's honest and powerful and everything art should be. And I am so incredibly proud of you. Those words, the words Simone had longed to hear for 7 months, The words she'd painted for, struggled for, survived for, hit her like a physical force. Her knees actually buckled, and Tristan was suddenly there, steadying her, even as her father stepped forward with his arms open. "Can you ever forgive me?" Victor asked, his voice breaking on every word. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I said unforgivable things. But Simone, you're my daughter. You're my only child, and I love you. And I am so sorry for everything." What do you do when the person who hurt you most admits they were wrong? When the apology you've dreamed of actually comes? When the door you thought was closed forever suddenly opens? Simone looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw not the authoritative attorney or the demanding patriarch, but just a man. A flawed, prideful man who'd made a terrible mistake and spent 7 months living with the consequences. She saw the grey in his hair that hadn't been there before, the lines around his eyes, the weight he seemed to carry in his shoulders. He'd been suffering too, in his own way. Maybe not the same way she had, but suffering nonetheless. "I forgive you," Simone whispered, and then she was in her father's arms, and he was holding her like she was 6 years old again, and both of them were crying so hard they could barely stand. Marion wrapped her arms around both of them, and the 3 Ellisons stood there in the middle of the charity gala, holding each other, crying, healing. Around them, the crowd had gone quiet, watching this family reunion with the kind of reverent attention usually reserved for the art on the walls. Because this was art too, in its own way, the art of forgiveness, of love stronger than pride, of broken things being made whole. When they finally separated, Victor kept one hand on Simone's shoulder, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. "I want you to meet some people," Simone said through her tears, and she turned to find the Carmichaels standing a respectful distance away, giving the Ellison family their moment but staying close enough to support Simone if she needed them. The 2 families came together slowly, carefully, like countries negotiating peace after a war. Maxwell Carmichael extended his hand to Victor Ellison, and for a moment Simone held her breath, wondering if her father's pride would reassert itself, if he'd resent the family who'd taken in his daughter when he'd turned her away. But Victor shook Maxwell's hand firmly and said, with genuine humility, "Thank you for taking care of my daughter when I was too stubborn to do it myself. Thank you for seeing her value when I was blind to it. I will be grateful to you for the rest of my life." Maxwell's eyes softened. "She's an extraordinary young woman. We're blessed to have her in our lives." "So are we," Victor said, looking at Simone. "So are we." Vivian stepped forward, elegant and gracious, and embraced Marion. "Your daughter has become like one of my own," she said. "But I'm so glad she has her own mother back." Marion wiped her eyes. "Thank you for being there for her. Thank you for giving her the family she needed." Ellie, never one to let a moment stay too serious, broke the tension by grabbing Simone's hand and saying, "Does this mean we get 2 Thanksgivings? Because I'm absolutely here for that." Everyone laughed, the sound breaking through the last of the tension, and just like that, the 2 families who'd each claimed Simone as their daughter were becoming something more than separate entities. They were becoming connected, woven together by the young woman who stood at the center of both. The gala continued around them, but for Simone, the night had already reached its peak. The auction of Crossroads became almost secondary to the miracle of having both her families in the same room, talking and laughing and celebrating together. When the bidding started, Simone watched from the sidelines, Tristan's hand in hers, almost detached from the proceedings, until something extraordinary happened. Victor Ellison placed a bid on her painting, a generous bid that made several people in the room turn to look at him. Then Maxwell Carmichael countered with an even higher bid. Back and forth they went, these 2 men who'd each played the role of father in Simone's life, competing not with animosity, but with something that looked almost like playful respect. "Gentlemen," the auctioneer finally said with an amused smile, "you're driving the price up considerably." "Good," Victor called out. "It's for charity, and this painting deserves recognition." "Agreed," Maxwell added, "though I think we might be at an impasse." The auctioneer looked between them, clearly unsure how to proceed. Then Victor did something that made Simone's heart swell almost to bursting. He turned to Maxwell and said, "What if we pool our final bids, win it together, The painting can hang half the year in my law office and half the year in your gallery. A shared custody arrangement for art. The room erupted in applause and laughter. Maxwell grinned and nodded, and the deal was struck. Crossroads, the painting that represented Simone's impossible choice between two worlds, would be shared between those two worlds, a symbol of reconciliation and unity. As the gavel came down, finalizing the sale, Simone found herself surrounded by everyone she loved. Her parents, the Carmichaels, Tristan, even Keisha, and the other artists from the park who'd come to support her. She looked around at all these faces, all these people who'd helped her become who she was meant to be, and felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She'd lost everything to find herself, and in finding herself, she'd gained more than she'd ever imagined possible. The weeks following the gala were a blur of reconciliation and new beginnings. Victor and Marion came to visit Simone's tiny studio apartment, and while Marion tried to hide her shock at the size and condition of the space, Victor seemed genuinely impressed by how she'd transformed it into a working studio. He stood in front of her easel, studying her works in progress, and said quietly, "You've built something real here. Something authentic. I'm sorry I couldn't see that before." "You see it now," Simone said. "That's what matters." True to his word, Victor never again questioned her career choice. In fact, he became one of her fiercest advocates, using his connections to introduce her to collectors and gallery owners, always careful to let her talent speak for itself, while making it clear he was proud to be her father. He even established a scholarship fund for young artists from underprivileged backgrounds, naming it in Simone's honor, the Simone Ellison Arts Initiative. When he told her about it, tears in his eyes, Simone understood that this was his way of making amends, of transforming his regret into something positive. Marion went through her own transformation. Watching her daughter's courage had awakened something in her, the realization that she'd spent 30 years sublimating her own desires to keep peace with her husband. The week after the gala, she had a piano delivered to the Buckhead mansion and began taking lessons again, something she hadn't done since before she married Victor. "You taught me that it's never too late to reclaim parts of yourself you thought you'd lost," she told Simone over coffee one morning. "I forgot that I used to love music. I forgot that I used to be creative. Thank you for reminding me." The relationship between the Ellisons and the Carmichaels deepened in unexpected ways. The two couples began having dinner together monthly, discovering they had more in common than just Simone. Victor and Maxwell bonded over their shared love of art history. Marion and Vivian found they both volunteered for similar charities. Even Ellie became close with Simone's parents, her youthful energy bringing laughter to the Buckhead mansion in a way it hadn't experienced in years. But perhaps the most significant change was in Simone herself. With her family restored and her career gaining momentum, she felt whole in a way she never had before. The pain that had fueled so much of her early work transformed into something different, not happiness exactly, but a deep, settled contentedness. She painted with more freedom now, less driven by the need to prove herself and more by the simple joy of creation. The solo show at the Decatur Gallery came 6 months after the gala, and it was a triumph. All three families came, biological and chosen, now so intertwined it was hard to say where one ended and another began. Simone's work had evolved, showing not just struggle and pain, but also hope, love, and healing. The centerpiece was a new painting she called Two Gardens, depicting two families reaching toward each other across a bridge made of light, a young woman standing at the center, connected to both. On the night of the opening, as Simone stood surrounded by her art and her loved ones, Tristan pulled her aside. His eyes held that particular glint she'd come to recognize. He was nervous about something, which was rare for him. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. That's actually the problem. Or the opportunity, I guess." He took her hand. "Come with me." He led her to a small alcove off the main gallery, a quiet space where they could be alone. And there, in that small space surrounded by art, Tristan went down on one knee. Simone's hand flew to her mouth. "Simone Ellison," Tristan said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "You changed my life. You taught me what courage looks like. You showed me that being true to yourself is worth any sacrifice. You made me believe in love that doesn't ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are." He pulled out a small velvet box, opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful ring. "I don't want to imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me?" Through tears and laughter, Simone managed to say, "Yes. Yes, absolutely yes." The alcove erupted in cheers. Both families had apparently known about the proposal and had been waiting just around the corner. They poured in, congratulating the newly engaged couple, and Simone found herself passed from embrace to embrace, her father's arms to Maxwell's, her mother's to Vivian's, Ellie jumping up and down with excitement while Keisha whistled and hollered. In that moment, Simone realized something profound. She'd started this journey thinking she had to choose between family and dreams, between love and authenticity, between security and passion. But the truth was more complex and more beautiful than that simple binary. By choosing herself first, by having the courage to walk away from what wasn't serving her, she'd created space for everything she actually needed. She'd lost one family temporarily, but she'd gained it back transformed, more accepting, more real. She'd found a second family who chose her freely. She'd discovered a partner who loved her, not despite her flaws and struggles, but because of the whole, complicated, beautiful person she was. The life she'd built from scratch, the tiny apartment, the waitressing job she'd finally been able to quit, the paintings that now sold for enough to support. Her, the community of artists who'd become friends, the love that had found her when she wasn't looking for it, wasn't the life anyone had planned for her. It was better. It was hers. Months later, on a warm Saturday afternoon, Simone stood in Piedmont Park teaching a painting workshop for children from underprivileged neighborhoods. This had become her favorite thing to do, giving back, helping young artists discover their own voices, showing them that creativity wasn't a luxury but a necessity. Tristan was beside her, helping a little boy mix colors, his shirt already splattered with paint, and his expression one of pure contentment. They'd married in a small ceremony 3 months earlier, both families celebrating together, and now they were building a life that honored both art and love, both family and independence. From a nearby bench, 4 parents watched. Victor and Maxwell discussing some point of art history, Marion and Vivian planning a joint fundraiser for arts education. Victor caught Simone's eye and gave her a thumbs up, mouthing "That's my daughter" to a passerby who'd paused to watch the workshop. The pride in his eyes was unmistakable, uncomplicated, everything Simone had once dreamed of seeing. A little girl approached Simone shyly, holding up a painting of her family, stick figures holding hands, the colors bright and joyful. "Is this good?" she asked, her voice uncertain. Simone knelt down to the girl's level, looking at the painting with genuine attention. "Do you know what makes a painting good?" she asked gently. "It's not whether it looks perfect or whether everyone likes it. It's whether it's true. Did you paint what's in your heart?" The girl nodded seriously. "Then it's perfect. Don't let anyone ever tell you that what's in your heart isn't worth expressing." As the girl ran off, clutching her painting with new confidence, Simone felt Tristan's arm around her waist. "You're incredible with them," he murmured. "I'm just telling them what I wish someone had told me earlier," Simone replied. "That their dreams matter, that their authentic self is worth fighting for, that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary." The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled light on the scene, children creating fearlessly, families watching proudly, a young woman who'd lost everything and gained it all back, transformed and whole. Simone thought about the journey that had brought her here, the painful choice in her father's study, the lonely nights in a tiny apartment, the exhausting work of rebuilding from nothing, the slow accumulation of small victories that led to this moment. She'd walked out of one life and into uncertainty. She'd traded security for authenticity. She'd chosen her dreams over her family's approval, not knowing if that approval would ever come. And the gamble had paid off in ways she never could have imagined. Not because everything worked out perfectly, there had been pain and struggle and moments of crushing doubt, but because she'd stayed true to herself, even when it cost her everything. And that's what I want you to understand. Your dreams matter. Your authentic self matters. The things that make your heart sing, The passions that wake you up at 3 a.m., the creative impulses you've been told are impractical or foolish or unrealistic. They matter, not because following them guarantees success or wealth or even happiness, but because living a life that honors who you truly are is the only way to live a life you won't regret. Simone's story isn't just about a woman who chose art over law. It's about any of us who've ever stood at a crossroads between who we are and who we're supposed to be. It's about the courage it takes to disappoint people we love in order to become ourselves. It's about the family we're born into and the family we choose, and how sometimes, if we're very lucky and very brave, those two families can learn to love the same person for who they actually are. So here's my question for you, and I really want you to think about this. What dream have you been putting off because you're afraid of what it might cost you? What version of yourself are you hiding because you're worried about disappointing someone else? What would you do if you knew that choosing yourself, really, truly choosing yourself, might be painful at first, but could lead to a life more beautiful and authentic than anything you've settled for? Drop your answer in the comments below. Tell me about the dream you're afraid to chase, the path you're scared to take, the version of yourself you're keeping locked away. And if this story moved you, if Simone's courage inspired you even a little bit, hit that like button and subscribe, because there are more stories like this one. Stories of ordinary people making extraordinary choices, of broken things being made whole, of dreams that cost everything and give back even more. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's a friend who's stuck in a career they hate. Maybe it's a family member who gave up their passion for practicality. Maybe it's someone standing at their own crossroads right now, trying to decide between safety and authenticity. Let them know they're not alone. Let them know that courage is possible. Let them know that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are, and that the finding is worth the losing. Because Simone Ellison walked out of her father's mansion with nothing but her dreams and her art supplies, and she built a life so beautiful that even the father who rejected her had to admit she was right. And if she can do that, if she can survive disownment and poverty and doubt and come out the other side not just intact but triumphant, then maybe, just maybe, you can take that first scary step toward the life you actually want. The door is open. The crossroads is waiting. What are you going to choose? I'll see you in the next story. Until then, keep choosing yourself. Keep choosing courage. And remember, sometimes the people who disown you for following your dreams end up being the ones who are most proud when those dreams come true.